Chapter 2 is once again directed by Andy Muschietti and takes place 27 years after the events of the first film. Now, as most of you should know by this point, this isn't a straight-up sequel to 2017's It. This is literally just the second half of the story, because if you've seen how thick the book of It is, it's like that thick. So the most common sense thing to do is to split that story into two films. So this isn't a sequel, this is literally just the second half of the book. Now, I know what some of you are wondering. Aaron, is there a review for It 2017 already on your channel? The answer to that is no. Why? Because at the time, I was a bit of a pussy, not gonna lie, and I didn't see it in the cinema. I had every opportunity to see it in the cinema, but I didn't. However, I did watch it ready for Chapter 2. I watched it the other week, and I thought, before I get into my thoughts on Chapter 2, I will give you my very brief thoughts on Chapter 1, just so you know how I feel about it. It's a really good film. Whether you're looking at it as a horror film or a coming-of-age movie, it's brilliant in both aspects. I wouldn't necessarily say it's a scary movie, but it's just kind of creepy. And if anything, this first movie feels like the film equivalent of going through a haunted house or ghost train ride at an amusement park. That's the best way I can describe it. It's fun and enjoyable, but a bit creepy at the same time. All of the kid performances are brilliant, Andy Muschietti's directing is really solid, and Bill Skarsgård as Pennywise is really, really unnerving. If I had to give this movie a rating, I'd probably give it an 8 out of 10. If I had to nitpick, some of the effects are a bit crap. But, to be honest, because it over-relies on CGI at times in the movie, that's kind of going to be a given. So now that you know that I really enjoyed It Chapter 1, you're probably wondering, what do I think of Chapter 2? It's not that bad. It's definitely not as bad as some people have been saying it is. Because I've seen some reviews out there that have been straight up trashing It Chapter 2. And to an extent, I can kind of see where they're coming from, but from my perspective, I thoroughly enjoyed my time watching It Chapter 2, even though I am aware that there are quite a few problems with it. First of all, I have to talk about the casting in this movie, because it's probably the best thing in the entire film. Every single person who is cast as an older version of one of their child counterparts literally looks and feels like the older version of them. I suppose the only two that this doesn't really work for, even though they are still good in the movie, are James McAvoy and Jessica Chastain. Like I said, they are really good in the movie and give it their all in specific scenes especially. But unfortunately, because I know their work so well, all I kept seeing was Jessica Chastain and James McAvoy. And it's nothing to do with how bad their performances were, because they weren't bad at all, they were brilliant. Unfortunately, because I'm just so used to seeing them, all I could really see was those two actors rather than the characters they were playing. However, everyone else in the Losers Club looks and feels like their counterparts. Specifically, two people in particular. Bill Hader as an older version of Richie, and James Ranson as an older version of Eddie. These are probably the two best casting choices in the entire film. You've probably heard a load of other reviewers already say this, but I'm just going to say it again. Bill Hader fucking nails every single moment he's on screen. He just feels like the older version of Finn Wolfhard's portrayal of Richie. And he's just perfect. I love Bill Hader anyway, from Saturday Night Live, so to see him really get a role that lets him spread his comedic wings, but also gets an opportunity to delve into some really emotional moments as well, was really nice to see. And he's actually a damn good actor if you give him a good role to work with. But I swear to God, James Ranson literally is an older version of the kid who played Eddie in the first movie. I don't know whether there's time travel involved or something, but everything from his facial features to little mannerisms he does and the way he talks is literally beat for beat how the kid portrayed Eddie in the first movie, and it's kind of unnerving with how accurate he is. Like, he does a brilliant job, and he still makes Eddie my favorite character in both of these films. But there's just something freaky about it. He's just so uncanny. I don't know. It's brilliant, but like there's something not right about it in a good way. And of course, Bill Skarsgård is really good yet again as Pennywise, and I feel like in this movie he gets some slightly more darker territory to delve into compared to the first movie. And that's not saying the first movie wasn't dark, but this movie definitely does go for a darker tone right from the word go. And that's one thing I did slightly appreciate about this movie over the first one. Is that the last movie definitely felt like a 80s adventure, family movie, despite it being a horror film. But this movie goes for a more mature tone to kind of reflect the fact that they are adults, not children anymore, and it really doesn't let up. And that is mainly down to Bill Skarsgård's performance, and he just nails every scene he's in once again. The editing was solid this time round, the cinematography was gorgeous just like it was in the last movie, and also this movie has a good sense of emotion and drama behind it as well. Because I was expecting it to be creepy, and, all the same things from the first movie, but there's a surprising amount of emotion and drama to be found in this movie, specifically towards the end. And there were a few moments in particular that really got me, more than I was expecting to anyway, especially from a horror film. So the fact that it was able to get those emotional beats out of me as well as the creepy ones is a job well done in my books. Unfortunately though, like I said before, this movie isn't perfect, and there are quite a few things holding it back from being as great as the first one, in my opinion. First of all, like the first movie, I still didn't find this film to be particularly scary. Yeah, it's very creepy and unsettling at times, but a lot of the scares are more just startling rather than legitimately scary. I would say there are two moments in particular that I legitimately found kind of scary. The rest of the movie is either really creepy or just really unsettling, or there's a jump scare to throw you off in the middle. Nothing particularly was legitimately scary in my eyes. Some of the CGI in this movie is really bad. And I know I kind of said that about the last film, but with It Chapter 1, any weaker effects simply looked weaker because there was such an overabundance of it. And even, the bad effects weren't that bad because they were still being used sparingly to an extent, and they still worked for what they were going for. However, this movie, there are quite a few moments that really go over the top with the amount of CGI they have in those scenes. And there are some scenes where it legitimately just doesn't work and really looks like CGI this time round. Now, usually that thing doesn't bug me, but, unless it does. And here, there were a few times where the CGI legitimately did bug me because I'm like, I can't take that seriously because it looks CGI. Like, really CGI. The other two things that hold this movie back from being as great as the first one is, first of all, there are some unintentionally hilarious moments in the movie. And that's not a good thing, because there were a few moments in the movie that are supposed to be creepy or stylistic, I suppose, but they're just so random. They just made me laugh more than anything else. Like, there's one moment in particular, and I will not spoil it, but it involves Eddie conquering his fear, per se, and just the I don't know why they chose to use a piece of music during that scene, but it's so out of place, and I just couldn't stop laughing, and I had no idea what the fuck was going on. So yeah, there's a few moments like that where weird choices in the directing department lead to some kind of hilarious scenes, and not intentionally hilarious either. The other reason why I think this movie is kind of held back from being as good as the first one as well is that the first movie kind of just felt very confined to the point and just got on with what it needed to do. This movie, though it does get to the point fairly quicker than I was expecting, there are still quite a few moments that feel like the runtime is dragging. Ever so slightly, though, because as you've probably been made well aware, this movie is significantly a lot longer than the first movie was. And throughout the runtime, and as I was watching the movie myself, I personally didn't feel the runtime drag it down at all. But the more I think about the movie afterwards, I do start to think about, yeah, the first movie was a lot more tight, confined, and just got on with it and got to the point quicker. Whereas this one does do that same style, but a little bit slower. Like, it does get to the point, and it does feel kind of confined and tight to an extent, but just takes longer to get to those points. Whereas the first movie was like, boom, 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 we're doing this, we're doing that, boom, it's done. There you go. In the end, though, despite its problems, I still did thoroughly enjoy It Chapter 2, to the point where I'm probably going to give it a 7 out of 10. It's leaning more towards like a 6.5 or a 7, but I think I'm happy staying at a 7. I don't think it's nearly as bad as everyone's saying it is. But that being said, the reasons people are pointing out do still kind of make sense. If you're a fan of the first movie, or just Stephen King in general, I would still highly recommend checking this movie out, because you never know, you might like it, or you might not. At the end of the day, it's your opinion, you make of this movie what you will. So guys, that was my review for It Chapter 2. I hope you enjoyed it. If you liked the video, then give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Bye.